Hey there, friends. Welcome to another session of the Deconstructing Faith Summit. I don't know about you, but that last session is like mind-blowing. I know I was there when we recorded it, but holy moly, so much amazing content to digest. And we're only on our second session. We're just now going into our second session for the day. So before we jump into this panel, which is you're going to absolutely love it. I know you're going to love it. But before we jump into it, I want to give a quick shout out to our event sponsors, Erdman's Publishers, Circle of Atonement, and the Deconstruct Your Faith Group Coaching Program, because they're the ones that are allowing us to bring you this event. They're the ones who have allowed us to bring in sign language interpreters and to keep general admission free. So I want to give them a shout out. They all have tables over in the virtual exhibit hall, so please visit them. They're just packed with resources to help you in whatever season of deconstruction that you're in. I also want to give a great big shout out to our sponsor for this panel, which is Relationships, Gender, and Intimacy After Purity Culture. Tiffany Yankee Brooks, great friend of mine, fantastic author, New York Times bestselling ghostwriter. And you may have seen the review of Gaslighted by God, Reconstructing a Disillusioned Faith on my blog a while back. She wrote that. And she is sponsoring this panel, which is just, like I said, it's going to be a little spicy. We're going to get right into the nitty gritty. So let me tell you about the fabulous people that are on this panel. And then we'll just start diving right into the topic. First, we have Eily Hite. She's a queer ex-evangelical who grew up in a lot of churches and found their queerness along the way. Meghan Tschanz is an author of the book Women Rising and podcaster over at Faith and Feminism. Naiomi Gonzalez is a Puerto Rican queer, non-binary-ish professional nerd and blogger. Meghan Crozier, a progressive Christian writer, podcaster of the Thereafter podcast, and she also hosts a deconstruction book club. And Florence Okwusogu is a therapist, soul liberation guide who is currently exploring the sacred feminine and present moment living. Hey, y'all, welcome to this panel. I can't wait for our participants to hear a little bit about your story. So if you're ready, I'm ready. Why don't we just jump right into these fantastic questions? I think that one of the biggest questions that we get over and over for people coming out of purity culture is that sometimes we just feel worthless because we're not living up to who purity culture said we were supposed to be. Like we feel like we're failing. We feel like there's this load of shame and just all these questions because we're not who we thought God wanted us to be. So I would love it if we could just kind of go around the group and everybody can share just a little bit about how do you navigate that when those feelings come up, even now that we're kind of living on the other side of purity culture.
Yeah, I'll just dive in because it looks like I'm a little square thing that I'm the first one. I'm Meghan Tschanz, as she already said. I'm author of Women Rising and podcaster of Faith and Feminism. And purity culture is something I think people who have been gendered female, is something that we deal with a lot. I know that all sexes and all genders deal with this, but specifically, I think the messaging that people grew up with who identify as women or girls or who have been identified as such is really heavy. I remember growing up being told that my identity was completely found in men and what they thought of me, whether or not I was pure enough or if I was sexy enough. It seemed like I was getting two different messages from the church. Or from church and society, where society wanted me to be skinny and attractive and to flaunt my body because sexuality was all that mattered to men. And then in the church, they said that it wasn't all about men, but it was still all about men and what they thought of me, because it was like, how can you cover up? How can you prevent a man from lusting? Don't be a stumbling block. And I really struggled with this identity that was slapped on me that was highly, highly sexualized. Purity culture says they're trying to prevent the sexualization of young girls, but that's exactly what they're doing, right? Like they're saying, they're likening young girls to objects from the get-go. They're saying, if you've done anything sexual, you're a licked lollipop or a chewed up piece of gum. We've all heard the analogies. And I always struggled with this. Even from a young age, I really struggled with being sexualized all of the time and not understanding how my body, for merely existing, was something that could be commented on or seen as something to be consumed. Because even in, you know, those teachings, all of those analogies were given is like, my body is for the consumption of men. And it wasn't until I got older that I started to realize that purity culture is not something that just exists in evangelical culture. It exists basically anywhere that I think patriarchy exists. And so I started to realize that different iterations of purity culture were actually causing extreme violence towards women. And so an example of this is female genital mutilation, which is happening around the world, even here in the United States, where little girls are mutilated to control their sexuality. And then what we're seeing in Iran right now as we're speaking is an uprising of women and men and everyone because a young woman was killed because her hijab wasn't worn properly. And I think that's another iteration where we see violence towards women who don't comply with the purity culture rules. And of course, we see this here in the United States. If you all remember the case of Brock Turner, who raped Chanel Miller, when they went to court, they were arguing about what she was wearing and what she was drinking. And what I've come to realize is that purity culture is not about morality. It's actually a way to justify violence towards women. And so when I began to realize that purity culture wasn't the system of morality, of something that reflected on me, but was actually more about men trying to control women's sexuality, and oftentimes with violence. Again, we see this around the world. If we don't see ourselves in some of these extreme examples, I don't think we're being honest with ourselves. And so for me, when I started to realize that purity culture was about violence, it really helped me to let go of this idea that I have to behave or act or dress in a certain way, because the truth is, it doesn't really matter how I act or behave or dress. I still am subjected to catcalls or this idea that there's a male entitlement to my body. And so for me, realizing that again, it wasn't about morality, or it wasn't reflective of me, and it was all reflective of this system of patriarchy and violence, really helps me to let go of this idea of who I should be and who I shouldn't be, because I don't want to be complicit or uphold a system of violence. So that's for me, that's probably the most powerful thing that's helped me really let go and release that shame.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's good.
I'll go ahead and jump in here. And I think so often when we first start deconstructing purity culture, we look at the sexual aspects, but I also think there's so many of those, like Meghan was talking about, the gender roles, the scripts that we're given for how to be in the world. And so I think that a huge piece of letting go of that shame has been understanding my own voices inside my head that really say, this is the script of how you think you're supposed to be living. And my therapist calls it the evangelical mom voice or evangelical wife voice that says, this is how you should be a mom, or this is how you should be a wife. And I think a lot of it has been just naming that voice and being able to understand what that voice is telling me, and then this script that I'm trying to flip to say, hold on, but actually I have a career and I have things happening. I might be friends with men. I'm also bisexual, and so I think flipping those scripts and saying, I have permission to live in my body and live in the world in a different way than the way that was prescribed for me. And I think that's been the biggest part of, and it's hard. It's not easy. I still deal with it. And so, but naming it and calling it out and being able to, that's what the first step is for me, to being able to combat it and then flip that script.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I will jump in now. Lots of interesting points raised already. And for me, as somebody who is based in the UK, the term purity culture is something that I have only learned through my US friends. I think the closest equivalent that I've experienced is modesty. And so I think just the language already shapes, like Meghan said, the script that I was exposed to. And I just want to say that I wasn't raised in an evangelical Christian experience. My background was is my mum is Catholic, but very, very diehard Catholic. My dad is Methodist, but we were raised going to Catholic church, and I went to a convent girls' school. And again, that really shaped my experience of, you know, being a woman, because, you know, it was an all-girls environment. We had to do what the nuns told us to do. There were nuns still there at that time. And so all of that shaped my experience. But it wasn't until I guess, became born again, and I entered into the evangelical space, that the whole concept of modesty really began to influence my life at a more conscious level. Before, it was just kind of like socialization. I was in an environment, and, you know, I was picking up these things that were being passed down onto me. But all of a sudden, I was in an experience where I was coming into agreement with that view of what it meant to be a woman. And so I remember an occasion where I was out shopping, and a man approached me. I must have been around 25, 26 at the time. A man approached me and he said to me, "You're Christian, aren't you?" And I was like, yeah. At that time, I thought, you know, really proud. Oh, look, you know, you can see that I'm a really good, virtuous woman. I'm a Christian. But I remember reflecting on it and thinking, what was it that made him say that to me? And I realized that it was the way that I was dressed. I didn't realize this until, you know, I started to rediscover myself. And I think for me, one of the first things I began to rediscover was color, because, you know, as a modest woman, you want to be a wallflower. You don't want to, you know, be seen. You don't want to put yourself out there. And at the time, ironically, I was doing a Christian counseling course. It was an integrative counseling course. And, you know, I've been exposed to so many different beliefs from people who maybe didn't have the same exact faith background as me. And I really remember just wanting to just wear color, you know, and that was like a brand new thing for me, to want to be visible, not for anybody else, but just for myself. I just really felt an awakening inside of me. And so, yeah, I just wanted to touch on those aspects, how we can be socialized without even realize we're socialized, before we begin to consciously come into agreement with those scripts and those ideas of what it means to be a woman. And I find it really interesting because, as I said, I'm based in the UK, and listening to my friends in the US, my experience hasn't been as fundamental, or it hasn't been as, you know, restrictive. It's not Bible Belt US Christianity. Do you know what I mean? But over here, we are still influenced. It takes its own shape and flavor, but we are still influenced, and women here are still influenced. And I think another aspect to add on is that I am of African heritage, and we do Christianity, you know, differently. Whether we're based in the US or whatever, it becomes part of our culture. It becomes part of our identity. And even though I was raised within the Catholic church, we did go to spiritual churches, you know, where you wear all white and you're covered and you're barefoot. And all of those experiences of being a Black, African, British woman has influenced how I view myself, even giving myself permission to stand out, to disobey. That's a big one, you know. And if it's part of my cultural identity, then disobedience is huge. Me being willing to be seen as me is huge.
Thank you. That was so good.
Yeah, that was
lots
awesome.
of nodding heads. I don't know if you could see it, but everybody in the chat were like this. Yes. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Florence. I love to hear how different everyone's journey is in regards to purity culture. for me, purity culture and deconstructing, and this I think will be a lifelong journey. But off of what Meghan T was saying earlier, I also came to the realization, I was raised in the church, and I came to the realization that it is about men. It's for men. It's, in my experience, how can we shape women to be the most desirable, the most submissive, the most whatever for men? Like, how can we make women what we want them to be, you know? And so for me, that was the beginning. I was like, oh, wait a minute, you know, like, I grew up in the church, and I went to a Christian college, and I started to realize this, and I'm like, this is for men, you know, being told what I need to think, and like you said, wear and believe, and no sex before marriage, and who I need to marry, what this all needs to look like. For me, I was like, all right, I started to think, I question it, I felt it in my gut. I was like, I don't think this is right. And for me, as a queer person, that was the beginning of the end. That was the first, I was like, oh, this is all about men. And then I was like, do I even like men? And through that journey, I actually came out as bisexual first, which I always say to my friends, my queer friends, that it was harder for me to admit and to fully say, okay, I identify as a lesbian, than it was to say, I like women. It was hardest for me to fully be like, I don't even like men. I'm not attracted to them at all. To say I'm queer at all, if that makes sense. So purity culture had its nails so deep in me. It had its hooks so deep in me that I was like trained and focused. This is all for men. Am I doing everything I can for men? Like, am I saying the right thing? Am I wearing the right thing? Am I thinking the right things? Am I doing this? And then I was like, wait. And so I slowly, bit by bit, I started to question and pull back and say no, and take those hooks out of my brain and say I don't think this is right. And for me, that led to understanding and accepting my sexuality and who I was, and saying, this is who I am. I'm a queer person, but yeah, like I said, I think it's a lifelong journey and a lifelong road, constantly learning, constantly deconstructing, reconstructing, things like that. And in regards to navigating it all, I have found a lot of freedom and clarity in the queer community and with my queer friends and siblings, like especially with queer people who were also raised in the church, who are from religious communities. So for me, it was a step-by-step process. And then I find the most freedom and the most comfort in my queer community and the people that I surround myself with when those claws of purity culture come back and I feel like, oh no, I have these compet thoughts, or am I realizing that I'm doing something for a man, like, oh shoot, I'm doing this for the approval of a man, or I'm going back to these old ways. I find a lot of freedom and comfort in my queer community. So that's what I would say.
So I grew up in a fundamentalist Hispanic Pentecostal congregation, and there are two important things to know about that congregation. One, everything was heavily gendered. I've since learned that even for evangelicals, the church I went to was very strict. So of course, only men or women existed. Anything outside of that was not viewed as existing or as valid. But women had to have long hair, had to wear skirts below the knee. We had to make sure that our outfit was modest, so cover up the girls, or whatever you want to call them, the breasts. We had to. Men were the spiritual head of the households, and men had to have short hair, and they had to dress like men. Women could preach, and they were allowed to do all that, but we were still kind of viewed as like, oh well, it's our fault, it's Eve's fault for humanity and the fall of our relationship with God. Childbirth was viewed as partly a curse, and so something. And then the second thing to know is that shame was a big component of our theology. Shame in regarding sexuality and the body, that's part and parcel of purity culture, but shame in general. Our whole theology was that we were so horrifically sinful that Jesus had to die for our sins, and every single thought that we had, whether it was about sex or whether we were just even angry, was evidence of us killing Jesus on the cross. So that shame was just a core part of every aspect of our theology. So when I started to unravel little bits and pieces, the whole thread started to fall apart. So I think my first real question was, is being gay in a Christian possible? And of course, in that congregational setting, it was like, no, of course not. You have to be heterosexual, cisgender, monogamous. But then I started learning, wait, there are Christians that have different beliefs. Or like, wait, fundamentalist Pentecostalism isn't actually the only form of Christianity available. So then I started asking more questions, and I'm a professional nerd. I love studying. I'm always reading. I have too many degrees to count, so I'm always learning. So once that happened, I started thinking, wait, if this church is wrong about, being gay and Christian, what else are they wrong about? Oh, they're wrong about evolution not being true. They're wrong about, well, if they're wrong about all that, then who are they to say that I am an abomination to God because I'm not straight or cisgender? Who are they to say that my queerness and non-binary-ish is an affront to God? And I started realizing, you know what? That's not true. And then I started learning that, hey, all these other voices, I'm going to prioritize them. I'm going to prioritize queer theologians. I'm going to prioritize women. I'm going to prioritize black people, mujerista theology, all this other things. And then once that happened, the shame started to get just a little bit less and less because I wasn't prioritizing those voices that I had grown up with. I still struggle with it, and that's still something that I navigate daily, like reminding myself that I am worthy of love, that God loves me. I am made in the image of God in all my like non-binary-ish queerness self.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. Thanks for sharing that. Especially the piece you said where you stopped centering the voices that were harming you and said, what else is out there, without judging what else is out there. I think sometimes when we get really embedded in these toxic religious environments, we judge everything outside of that, and we never open ourselves up to be shaped by it. So I think that's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I promised our attendees that we would get into the nitty gritty. So we're just going to go right there. Okay. A lot of times when we talk about purity culture, we talk about bodies, we talk about sex. I want to talk, yes, we can absolutely talk about sex, but I want to go from a perspective of physical intimacy. So it doesn't matter if you're having intercourse or not, but just talking about this idea of intimacy outside the box of toxic religion. We talk about desire, we're talking about our physical needs and our needs for emotional intimacy. And I'm really curious what has come up for each of you around that. Like, how is it different now than what you were taught it was supposed to be? And I'm using air quotes if anybody's listening without watching. It's air quotes supposed to be.
I'll jump in if that's all right.
Sure.
My partner and I have had many conversations in regards to when and where we learned information, because for us, we both grew up in the church, and for me, when it came to sex and physical intimacy, it was hush hush. We didn't talk about it. I felt like there was a lot of power in regard, the church, they're like, we hold this power over you by not giving you the information that you need. And so then I turned to the internet, which can be a cesspool. I turned to, because I didn't know. I wanted to figure out all these questions. I'm like, I don't know what all this is. So I'm curious. So I go to the internet and I learn things, and I have this warped view of what sex, physical intimacy, queer sex is. Straight, if we're not even going to talk about straight sex, we're not going to talk about queer sex. So, we've got all these, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do. I have all these things. And then I met my now partner and I fall in love, and it's so much softer and warm, and just so, I don't want to get too vulgar, but I learned a lot from pornography and this view in this world of this is what it is. And I am so lucky that in my partner, I have found the warmth, the slowness, the beauty, the real true love in that intimacy, in that it's but that's what I had to do. When I didn't get the information from the church, I had to go other places. And where did I go? The internet. I went to porn. I went to all these places because I just was so curious. And now, learning that it's so much more different. And it is. It's just, I don't know if that really answered.
Yeah, thank you for that.
I have a thought.
I'd like to.
Go ahead, Florence.
I like the fact that you kind of phrased it as intimacy, rather than kind of jumping into sex and the body, because I definitely think that we are not taught about intimacy in the church. The most intimate relationship that we can ever possibly have is our relationship with God. Yeah, there's so much in the content of the Bible about marriage, very much from an instructional perspective, without looking at the soul or the heart, because it's all wicked, not to be trusted. And I think that kind of seeps into culture and it seeps into society, because I was never, ever taught about that, not whilst I was in school, not from my family. So, like Eily, I ended up turning to what was available. And for me, guilty secret, it was Mills and Boon's book. Does everybody remember that? And, those are fairy tales, right? Those are fairy tales, guilty secrets that you're just too ashamed to tell anybody about. And nobody is going to correct you about what you're reading in there. And all of it is about these alpha males and these very vulnerable women who were lucky enough to find this super rich alpha male who could save them. And so that's basically the template that I ended up looking for, which led me into a really toxic relationship. And you can't bring that to church because there's so much shame around it, and there's no teaching around what intimacy is. So when I was finally brave enough to leave that relationship and end up with my now husband, it was something that I definitely struggled with. I don't know who coined it, but the whole idea of intimacy is intimacy.
Oh,
have you heard of it?
I have not, but my brain just went.
Yeah.
Tell us more about
really
that for those who haven't heard. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's this idea of somebody looking into you being vulnerable enough to be seen as you are. And my relationship with my husband, after, all that kind of false teaching that I got from, Walt Disney, I mean, they're changing their script a little bit now, and Mills and Boon, it was so hard because in my mind, I was like, perfection exists. And we're kind of taught as women that we need to be perfect anyway, Proverbs and all of that. And so here I was with this imperfect man and learning how to be intimate in that relationship really has been something that has given me freedom to be imperfect and to be human and to be seen. So I really feel that this is something that is so missing, a great opportunity within society, within church, to teach this idea of what it means to be human, to be seen, to be vulnerable, so that we don't carry around that shame and that guilt, and we don't have to turn to places to get misinformation and then build our lives on that information that just hurts us.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's so good. Yeah.
I'll jump in. Angela, you mentioned emotional intimacy and physical intimacy, and I have a couple thoughts about that. I think for so long we're given the idea that, your partner needs to be it all for you, everything, all of your support, all of everything. And so I think part of my deconstruction has been realizing that it's okay to have different relationships with people that hold space for me differently than my partner. And I think part of that has been just knowing the relationship agreements that we have. And my partner did not grow up evangelical. And so his understanding of my deconstruction has been different than people that have been steeped in this. And so he realizes, and there's been conversations we've had where I'm like, this person can hold space for me so much differently than you're able to understand and have that. And he knows that, and he loves and supports that I am able to have men and women in my life that are able to have that relationship with me. And so I think part of that has been navigating, how do you, because I do have, and I've been vocal about this, I do have like DTRs with my friends sometimes, just, you know, those define the relationships talks, just to say like, hey, I'm in a monogamous relationship, but like, I really love the collaborating with you. I love the connection we have. And this is kind of where things are at. And that is helpful. And I think, having it a little bit, having just an understanding where everybody's on the same page about what something is and what it isn't is helpful. And then I think, so emotional intimacy, I think we were given that, like, if you're friends or if you're close with someone that's not your partner, you're having an emotional affair. And I think we need to push that away, because that's totally undefined. And that's this narrative of fear that we're given that causes us to not allow ourselves to get close with people. And I think also, like, you know, I'm in a straight passing monogamous marriage, but I'm bisexual. And so for me, like, that narrative would say, like, don't be friends with anyone then, because you're risking, you know, the attraction there. And it's like, my partner and I are open to who we're attracted to, because being able to say, like, once you're married, you're not ever going to be attracted to someone ever again is, you know, like that's not true. You're going to be attracted to people. And so I think we've had a lot of really open conversations. And so that's for us, emotional intimacy, but also physical intimacy. I think it's okay. I think Angela said we're getting into the nitty gritty. I'm going to get into the nitty gritty. So yes. I think learning about your body, learning about masturbation, normalizing that, even if you're partnered. I think it's so interesting, because I think that there's this narrative that, like, once you're married, you're gonna just, both of your sex drives are gonna line up evenly at the same time, and like you're just gonna like, and then everything's just gonna be like amazing all the time. And it's like, I think the thing that I want to normalize is, like, sometimes there's times where you're just kind of like, I just kind of want to do my own thing tonight. And that's what I'm going to do. And like, you go watch your favorite episode of your TV show, and that's your favorite thing to do tonight. And that's amazing. And then, like, the next night it might flip. And then sometimes it'll be like, hey, let's do this together. And I think that whole conversation of, like, we're given this thing that, like, this is how it should be. And then it's really not talked about how it really is. And so I think just normalizing, like, everyone looks different and everyone's relationship agreements look different. And so what works for you might look different, might work differently in a different partnership. And so taking away those scripts again, and then normalizing, you know, what's good for you and within your partnership, and the consent and the communication is good for you, and that works. And there's no shame around that.
Yeah. And sometimes what works for you and your partner right now may not be what works in a week or a month. My husband and I have been married for 20 years, and our life's radically different and our needs are different. And it doesn't mean that our marriage is at risk, because sometimes we just want to be by ourselves and do our own thing. Like, the maturity in a relationship and the attachment we have to ourselves and kind of that self-confidence piece is that we don't always have to be the person meeting the other person's need. Sometimes you get to just show up for yourself, and it's not sinful or selfish. It doesn't mean your marriage is on the rocks. It means you're a human being who sometimes is capable of just doing what you want. Yeah.
I was just going to say, for me, what's been helpful is embracing curiosity without judgment. Growing up, sex was kind of this, like, mystical, holy thing that was kind of something, and desire was something you also had to put in a box. It was like, it's like fire. If you let it go, it's going to burn everything down. And I tell people the only reason I had any little bit of sexual education was because I went to a private school where you had to opt out of sex ed. And I just didn't tell my mom that we were going to have a sex ed class. I was just like, oh, wait, what's going on? It was eye-opening. I had very little sexual education. And then as an adult, learning how to be like, okay, what are my boundaries? Not the boundaries that other people put on me, but what are my own personal boundaries? What am I comfortable with? Without saying, oh, these boundaries are not good, or these boundaries are too strict or too narrow, but like exploring. And that took time to explore, giving myself the space and opportunity to be able to take chances, to communicate obviously with the other person and to understand their boundaries. And so for me, just that ability to be curious without judgment has been so freeing. Like right now I'm single and I'm like, I'm not sure if monogamy is my thing, but I'm also not sure if being poly is my thing. I kind of like friends with benefits. Like, what does that look like? What does that mean? How do I navigate what that looks like? And like, just again, curiosity and being open. Like earlier in this, I said a euphemism for breast, and I was like, wait, why did I use that euphemism, girls? It's like, oh well, because when I grew up, we weren't really, those were like parts we were supposed to keep hidden and not mention. But like as I've gotten older, I've been like, no, I'm non-binary, but I love my breast. And just like talking about that and being able to express that and interact with people who also express that curiosity and joy about my body. So.
Love that. If anybody was watching our opening session on Thursday night, we were talking about sacredness of self. And I said, your boobs are sacred. And there were a few people that were like, they are. I never thought of that. And it's because we've been told that so much of us is innately bad and needs to be hidden. But, you know, on a cellular level, every single cell in your body is good and holy. And that's a game changer when we absorb that information.
Yeah, I have just a few thoughts to kind of bounce off based on this question. I really want to talk about how the gendered socialization that we get in evangelical culture. Obviously, we've talked a lot about how it's terrible for women or people who identify as female or have been perceived as such. But something I realized after I got married was my husband is very touchy, like not sexually. He just wants to like touch me. And I thought, wow, this is a lot. And then I was talking to Dr. Tina Schirmer-Schellers. I don't know if you all know who she is, but she's a Christian sex therapist. If you don't know who she is, you should look her up. She's great. But she talked to me about how men have been robbed in evangelical culture of intimacy, whether that's emotional, but also physical, because they've been conditioned from the age of 6 that I can't touch anyone unless it's in a sexual way. And so I think that made me so sad, because I've been allowed to, you know, even within this confining system, to like cuddle with my friends or to give a hug or to share these really deep emotional thoughts. And in so many ways, I was able to get, you know, that non-sexual intimacy that others have been talking about here. But men who have been raised in this system have been robbed of that. They've been told that if they express emotion, that's not like, you know, a certain defined emotion like anger or control or something like that, then that is something that's feminine and something they're not allowed to do. And then that idea that they're not even allowed to express physical intimacy at all, unless it's in a sexual way. I'm like, well, I wonder why so many we see so much sexual violence, because we're told that this is the only way you can express your physical needs. And so this, and I just think about sometimes about how that just messes with the brain and messes with an innate desire that all humans have to connect with one another emotionally and physically beyond sex. And so that's something that I thought of. And then I also thought of when I got married. I'm in a cis hetero relationship. I thought I had let go of so many purity culture teachings. And then when I first got married, you know, you're promised this amazing sex life. Like I followed all the rules. Like I followed the purity culture to the book. And I actually have a lot of regret about that. They told me I wouldn't regret it. I have a lot of regret about following purity culture because of the shame that it introduced into relationships that did not need shame. The number of conversations that me and my current husband had over the stupidest things for hours, like, oh, did you get an erection? We need to talk about this for 3 hours because you shouldn't get an erection and this is my fault. And that's like, it's just so stupid. I have so much regret over that. And like, I wish we had freedom to express ourselves in a way that we both felt safe. And I'm not saying that's like going all the way or doing whatever. I just wish that we were allowed to define what's felt safe and intimate for us instead of having shame introduced for these completely normal functions that come with any sort of intimacy, right? Like even, I mean, I learned that men get emotional erections, like, like just having to talk about all of that stuff all the time and feeling guilty was so stupid and I regret it. But even when I got married, I struggled to orgasm, which was what purity culture told me. I'd have an amazing sex life as soon as I got married. And I didn't know how to orgasm because I had never explored my body. I didn't know about my body. And him and I really struggled the first couple of months. I'm like, what's wrong with me? Why is my body not responding the way? And I think I had so much purity culture, I couldn't express myself. I constantly viewed myself, even in the most intimate moments, through his eyes, that I couldn't even focus on what felt good to me. And it was something I really had to work through, is letting go of this idea that my body is for him, that my pleasure is for him, that everything is for him, and actually pursuing what felt good to me. And, our sex life is obviously way, way better than it was when we first got married. We've been married for 5 years, and having the freedom to nitty gritty to explore sex toys like vibrators, like that was great. So for women or anyone who's feeling like sex toys are shameful, like sometimes they're really great and Target sells them. And I have some recommendations. So you don't even have to go to it. Like I love that Target sells them because when I was beginning to explore vibrators, I was like, well, I can't go to these like sex sites. And so, you know what? Target sells vibrators. So those are a few of the thoughts I have. And I just gave birth 2 weeks ago. And so my body has changed a lot since then. And even now I'm still having to work myself through, like, what do I think of my body? Yeah. And like, of course I married an incredible man and he loves my body no matter what, but I have to continually ask myself, I'm not defining my body through his eyes or any eyes that are not my own. What do I think of my body? What did my body just go through? What have I done? Am I proud of it? And so that's been even revolutionary for me, is to be like, to look in the mirror and see that my body has changed and be like, you know what? Like, I am so proud of you. I'm so proud the way you brought life, and you don't look the same in a lot of ways, but I'm just really proud of what you are. And I'm not going to define my body through what other people think of it anymore. So those are a few of the thoughts I have. I know that wasn't like super easy, but just a few of the things I think of.
Yeah, it's so funny because a lot of the pharmacies are now carrying sex toys, and I just like, it makes me so happy to think about that being normalized as a health need, as a normal, like a vitamin, like it's a sex vitamin. It's a body vitamin. Because there's so much shame around figuring your body out that does harm to us as individuals and then any relationships that we're in. And I think that it's really important to be able to reconnect with our body. And I'm going to give you a freebie. I paid a lot for a lot of therapy hours for this. But one of the biggest revelations that I have had, thanks to a wonderful therapist and a lot of hours, is that I didn't know how to be intimate with myself. And I don't just mean sexually arousing and masturbation, but like I didn't know who I was, and I didn't know how to connect with me, which made it really hard to connect with my partner. and to connect with my kids and my siblings and my friend, and like to be able to connect with them in an emotionally intimate way, in a vulnerable, open-hearted way. And then, you know, the complexity of being in a marriage for a very long time with the same person, and us unpacking years of individual trauma and trying to stay connected with my body and connected relationally with him was really hard. And I had to call a timeout. Thankfully, we have a really, my husband and I have a really honest relationship. And so I'm going to spill some stuff here that I haven't asked him permission to spill. And I also know that he's good with this because it's my story. I had to call a timeout and just be like, we're just not going to have sex for a while. I just need to take a step back because I'm doing this for you. And I'm doing this because I'm afraid if I don't, you'll leave. And I remember, even now, I feel the tears coming. I remember saying that and being like, oh shit, I just broke my marriage. There it goes. I just broke it. And that was like 5 years ago. And here we are. Because I took a step back and I said, what would it look like for me to love me and my body and my orgasms and my don't even know how to have an orgasm, and to grieve the sexual traumas that I have had 20 plus years ago, and just be like, this is the package. Let's look at her and let's just see what comes up. So if you're sitting here watching this and you're like, yeah, I don't even know where to start. Wondering where to start is where you start. Giving yourself permission to say, oh, maybe there's a different way. That's where you start. That's absolutely where you start. And one thing that just came up for me is we have a thread in the Facebook group. And I feel like this conversation particularly, it will be fantastic if I could ask the panelists to go to that thread a little bit later and share your resources. Meghan, tell us what toys were transformational for you. Naiomi, tell us what voices are y'all listening to that are outside of that purity culture box, and help us connect. And I've got a couple books that I can drop in there too that I've been reading. But just let's just if you guys are okay with me just throwing a curveball in there, if we can add some resources to that thread a little bit later. I'm not even watching the chat on the live feed, but I'm sure there are questions. You know, the questions that we're answering now are just scratching the surface. So would that be okay with everybody if we agree to circle back a little later and drop some resources over there? Cool. Thank you. Thank you for going with the flow. Yeah. Did everybody get a chance to answer that last question? I'm sorry. I got so enthralled in what I was saying that okay, cool. We have we've got about 10, like 8 or 10 minutes left. And I have one more question that I would love for everybody to go around. Without putting pressure on people to perform or to do what I did or do what y'all did, I just wonder if there's something that you hope everyone in our audience will get to or figure out, or maybe just something that you want everybody to have permission to do in this area of intimacy and gender and bodies and all of this. I know that's kind of a big question. So if we need to pause for a second and let you gather your thoughts. Audience, I just made that up. I didn't tell them that question was coming. Yeah, what are our hopes and dreams for people who are watching this?
I can jump in here. I really feel strongly that people should have permission to develop their own sexual ethic, right? And so I really push back on, there's a lot of voices out there that say they're like post-purity culture that are really pushing that there's this biblical sexual ethic of abstinence. And so their version of post-purity culture is, if you screwed up, then there's freedom from the shame of screwing up. And I really feel strongly that that's not screwing up. If it was within your sexual ethic, That's not screwing up. And so
Mhm.
once you say that it's a biblical or traditional ethic, it's a prescription. And so like Naiomi said, like, I'm not sure if I want an open marriage or if I want to be monogamous. Like, I love that. I love that people give themselves the permission to have the autonomy to say, you know, this is what I want, with consent, with communication, with safety. And I think once you have those baseline things, develop your ethic for you. Might not be the same that somebody else has. I have a lot of friends that are in open marriages that I see flourishing, that I love. I'm not in an open marriage. It's not for me, but I just love that that's an option for people. And so I think just developing your own ethic and not trying to say it has to fall into this script. I did have sex before I got married. I did have other partners. And for so long I had shame about that. And now I like look back and I'm like, I look at those as my like, go previous you, like that, like, you know. And so I think everybody has a different opportunity in different places in life where you can write your script. So have your own ethic.
I love that. Write your script. Okay, that's going on a Post-it note because I'm going to sit with that. That it's not follow the rules or break the rules, or it's just write your script. It's your life. Write the dang thing.
Kind of piggybacking off of that idea, I think what I would hope for people is that they can see themselves through their own eyes. I think, again, so much of purity culture was, if we were raised female, was what do men think of me? How can I protect them? How can I make them feel good? And so much of my life, and I still go through this, is like, who cares what they think? Do I feel like I am living according to my own ethic? Do I feel like I'm treating everyone with in the image of God, with humanity? And I also feel like, kind of, again, off of what Meghan said, I think there is such importance of creating your own script, but I also think there's permission. I think sometimes that you have to like go out and do all of the things that maybe you're uncomfortable with or you're not ready. Like, if you're not ready to have sex, then don't have sex. If you're not ready to, explore new ways, then don't explore those new ways. I think there is freedom to do that. And there's also freedom to not do that, because sexuality is such a spectrum and no one's is going to look the same. There's some people who might not desire sex at all, and they should have the freedom to not desire sex at all, and that to be okay, and not to be shamed. And there's some people like me who I'm very happy in a monogamous heterosexual relationship. That should be completely allowed. There's people who are polyamorous who that should be completely allowed. And so I think, again, there is such importance and asking yourself, do I feel safe? Do I feel loved? Is this the kind of experience that I feel safe in? That should be the question, not should I be going this far? Should I be exploring more? Should I be more adventurous? It's what is my body telling me? Do I feel safe? Do I feel ready for a vibrator? Do I feel ready for this? Do I feel ready for that? Because I think sometimes there's this pressure as we deconstruct to do all of the things. And then sometimes we get really hurt because we weren't ready, or that person that we had an experience with actually didn't respect us and didn't value us. And so I go so often to Dr. Tina Schimmer-Sellers, which I'll talk about or add in the thread that you were talking about.
Please do. Yeah.
I've had her on the podcast a couple of times to talk about sexual ethic and even Christian sexual ethic. And what she kept on coming back to is, do you feel safe and intimate and loved and cherished by your partner? That's the most important thing. Is this sexual encounter what you want? Do you feel like you're being valued as a human in this encounter? And so she talks a lot about that, actually, she's the expert. I am not. But she actually, if you go back and listen to that podcast, she mentioned like something Christian-y. that I can't remember because it was several years ago that I had that podcast. But that's what I want people to ask themselves is, first of all, see yourself through how do you perceive yourself? Like what you did, Angela. Like I've been having sex for you. I haven't been having sex for me or including me in this equation. And then also, what do I feel safe with? And if I don't feel ready for something, I don't have to feel ready for something. That's okay. I might not ever feel ready for it. I might be really happy not having sex ever. So those are just things I want people to have the freedom to explore.
Yeah, so good.
I loved what you said, Megan. There was so much there. I didn't know what I was going to say because Angela, that was just a really, really big question.
Yeah.
But I think what I want to talk about is the importance of our voice, and which is what I think Megan was kind of connecting with, being able to voice our needs. Where I want people to be able to reach is a place where they feel safe enough, comfortable enough, confident enough to give voice to what it is that they need, not just to feel it, but to also be able to voice it out. And the reason why I think it's important is because whether we use the words or not, our experience does traumatize us. It disconnects us from our body. It creates shame, it creates guilt. It basically disassociates us from ourselves. And being able to use our voice is a way of being our friend again, advocating for ourselves again, being in relationship and intimacy with ourselves again. I can relate to what Megan said about your body changing as a mum. My little girl is 2 now. And just because, being a mum is just such a busy lifestyle thing, I can't do all the things that might get my body close to where it was before. And it's something that but it's something that I've worked through in the sense of, like Megan, I'm proud to have delivered a child, and if the change in my body is the reward I get for being a mum, then that's amazing. But it also meant that I had to learn to feel okay in my body again. And that meant I didn't feel comfortable having sex with my husband for a while. And being able to give that voice so that I wasn't just having sex just because it was expected, and I wasn't honoring my experience of what I was going through and then building on the trauma that I had already gone through previously. So that's why I think it's so important about being able to give voice to what's going on inside of us, because that's also building intimacy. If we're in a relationship as well, it's bringing them into our experience as well, so that they don't feel like we put up walls and it's about them. It's really about us honoring ourselves.
Yeah, that's so good.
I would just add off of that, honoring yourself. If I could share anything, I would share, I want everyone to have permission to explore their desires, to spoil themselves, to be curious and to have fun, and to ask the questions, do the research, and take care of yourself while doing so.
I just want to give people the permission to just be, know that who you are right now is beloved and holy. You don't need to have all the answers. I know I look around and I'm like, wow, everyone else is so much more articulate than me, or they have a lot more wisdom or life experience than me. What's going on? But just know that who you are right now is enough. And eventually you'll figure it out. And sometimes when you think you figure it out, you realize, oh no, I have more to learn, or I actually don't have it figured out. And that is fantastic and okay.
That's perfect. What a great way to send us out. Thank you for that. Y'all have been amazing. We will drop lots of resources over there on the post. The moderators have some questions that people were asking during this session. We'll drop those over on the Facebook post too, so we can keep the conversation going. Whew, thank you to each of you for being here. Like, what a beautiful session. My heart is full and definitely changed by this. So I'm hoping that everyone who's watching is able to glean some permission to be, like Naomi said, just be wherever you're at is good, wherever you're at. Thank you so much to Tiffany Yakey Brooks for sponsoring this session. We're going to sign off and we're going to send you into the next session, which is Jim Palmer, OG deconstruction dude, Jim Palmer. You're going to love the next session. Thanks for being here. Thank you. And we'll see you in the next session.